Thank you. Our global audience connected with us today for this webinar on measuring, reporting and verification. I am Alexandra Sötzer with UNDP MDG Carbon, UNDP's corporate framework for carbon finance. This webinar is the third in a series POA and Beyond, which comprises in total 5 webinars until June 2014 and is organized jointly by the World Bank Group Climate Change Team in collaboration with the WBICC Institute and UNDP's MDG Carbon Programme. The webinar series POA and Beyond aims to contribute to addressing the challenges of POAs, measuring, reporting and verification, also referred as MRV, and new instruments such as NAMAs through sharing and discussing existing knowledge, good practices and new trends. Talking about MRV, it's evident that MRV is taking an increasingly important role in the ongoing climate negotiations, especially in the context of new instruments like NAMAs. The goal of MRV systems is to develop a framework for evaluation that is consistent, systematic and transparent. While emission reductions can be easily quantified, MRV systems may require other quantitative and qualitative metrics in line with the country's overall sustainability goals. This webinar will provide an overview of how MRV of new instruments can build on lessons learned from existing standards. Additionally, a qualitative metrics that accounts for a country's overall sustainability goals beyond emission reductions will also be presented in this webinar. The lessons learned in this webinar include possible MRV approaches for new instruments, which includes data collection and the process of reporting of assessment results according to established quantification standards, and additional qualitative metrics for sustainability parameters. In the previous webinars, we brushed our memory with the concept and regulatory framework of POAs and the role of CMEs and heard about how to successfully develop POAs in practice in the field. In today's webinar, we are pleased to have with us Mr. Renat Heuberger, CEO of South Pole Carbon Asset Management, and Mr. Miguel Rescalvo, Director of the NVGL Policy and Research Unit, to learn about MRV from different angles. Mr. Heuberger will present existing MRV practices, and Mr. Rescalvo will discuss additional qualitative metrics for sustainability parameters in line with the country's sustainability goals. After the 2 presentations, you will have the opportunity to ask your questions to both presenters. So, without any further ado, it's over to our presenters, Renat and Miguel.
Ladies and gentlemen, friends around the world, measuring, reporting and verification, probably the key and most important topic if you want to achieve tangible results in climate mitigation. I'm so happy when I see it, look at this list of friends and colleagues joining from around the world. I'm very glad and happy to see that so many committed people are with us on this topic. First of all, I would like to thank the World Bank and the UNDP for making this possible. We have all seen that climate negotiations have been slower than we expected, but I can see with a lot of joy that still a lot of power is behind this topic of MRV. Hello everybody. My name is Renat Heuberger, CEO of South Pole Carbon. We are a company specialized in mitigation measures and we are experts also in MRV. The goal of today's sessions very clearly is to outline the landscape of MRV and to look at what tools do we have today and tomorrow to provide good results in this field. I would like to start my presentation with looking at the broader MRV landscape. As you can see on this slide, there are 2 totally separate fields in which MRV is needed. On one side, we have inventories. These are national inventories, regional inventories, where we're stock taking how many tons of CO2 are emitted, what is the change on an annual basis. On the other side, we have MRV for actual mitigation measures. There, very obviously, we're talking about projects, programs, but increasingly also about policies. We'll come to that later on. To further complicate matters, we will have top-down and bottom-up approaches. It's not difficult to see that the MRV topic is very widespread. If we now look through the lens of the United Nations, the UNFCCC, the MRV landscape under the UN mechanisms, again here we see the pledges, the targets that have been communicated by the parties, leading to national greenhouse gas inventories. But the main focus of today's two presentations and the Q&A sessions is here more, not so much on the inventories, but more on the mitigation actions. Then also we have a wide range of tools and systems that have been used or are still in use. Of course, you all know the CDM, JI. We have heard a lot about RED, and in the future, as a result of the new mechanisms, new market mechanisms, and the framework of various approaches. There at the moment, we have in the UNFCCC these obligations of parties to report every 2 years their biannual update reports, their BERS, to the United Nations, and these update reports are then periodically checked also. But the system here to do that is not very well elaborated yet. If you look at useful standards that we have at the moment, and you will see right now that this MRV landscape is still very spread out. The good news is though that we have a lot of existing standards that we can build our activities on. I would like to start with what most of you are probably most aware of. These are the existing concrete project or program tools that we have. Very obviously, the most widely used these days is the CDM. The CDM, which has come up with hundreds of methodologies and tools to provide monitoring, reporting, verification for project activities. In the United States, in particular in California, we also have now a set of so-called CAR methodologies that have been added. And in Australia, by the way, a system, a toolbox of new methodologies is coming up as well. These have all been used to monitor, verify energy, waste, and other projects. Now, in terms of forestry and land use change, the CDM has never really taken off. There, the voluntary carbon standard, the UCS, has provided frameworks and methodologies. And recently, the gold standard has added knowledge to this field. The former carbon fix standard is now has been integrated into the gold standard and is now also coming up with tools to provide reporting verification. Adding to this, we also have existing tools that are beyond project by project sectors. I would like to mention here the cement sector. There we had, since quite a while, we have tools to provide specific sector benchmarks, cement industry, by the World Business Council Sustainable Development. That has been done for the cement industry, and such tools are also existing for other sectors. As for co-benefits, and I think this is an increasingly important sector that we will talk about this more in detail later on. As for co-benefits, meaning all the benefits that these projects do beyond reducing CO2 emissions, we have a variety of standards and tools that provide guidance on MRV. I would like to mention UNDP's MDG, or Millennium Development Goals, or Sustainable Development Goals, as they're called now, MDG SDG indicators. Important to mention is the gold standard here. In the forestry space, we have the CCBS, the Climate, Community and Biodiversity Standard. We have there the Social Carbon Standard and, quite new, the Women Carbon Standard, measuring benefits of such projects specifically for women. So these are all useful existing standards which we can use to build on when we're designing the new MRV architecture of the new mechanisms that we're about to build. When you start a new MRV for a climate mitigation action of any sort, you will always have to make sure that you get this design fundamentals right. So there's a few questions we need to ask before kicking off. We propose to start with the why. Why are we actually doing it? Is it to facilitate decision making, build trust, or track performance? Is it for access to international support? Depending on why exactly you do the MRV system, you will end up choosing different metrics and different. You will put your focus in a different way. Sorry for that. The key question there is: do you actually want to measure the greenhouse gas emission reductions that have been done, or is it the co-benefits? Or is the main purpose of your system to actually track the financing and the MRV support that has been done? During the MRV system. Is it a NAMA implementing agency in case of NAMAs here? Is it a participant in the private and public sector? Or is it the government or a donor? Depending on who it is, of course, you have to adjust your tools as well. And finally, how is it being done? Talking there about design principles. I think this is probably the most important factor because existing and working, properly operating MRV design needs to fulfill many criteria: completeness, comparability, transparency, and so on. Summing up MRV metrics, as I said, you can measure the financing that's flowing, you can measure from a technical point of view, and you can also measure processes. And as you will see, in terms of what exactly you measure, you can do this in a more quantitative way or in a more qualitative way. Most obviously, qualitative metrics are very simple and easy to use in case of measuring finances, and the more you move towards processes, the more qualitative it becomes. I would like to now present you with a simple cooking recipe to kind of move from this more overview to something very tangible. How to proceed if you want to set up a recipe for greenhouse gas quantification of a NAMA. Step one, you have to have the system boundaries of your NAMA. If you have that, you need to make very clear what exactly you're measuring. What is the baseline of the NAMA, and what are the product emissions? How can you measure that? Then, very important, especially in the case of NAMA, you need to talk about leakage. What is the leakage that where up or downstream emissions beyond your system boundaries are concerned? And if you have that, you then need to define your monitoring parameters. For those of you who are aware of the CDM, you will find out that this cooking recipe is relatively similar to the challenges that you had when in the CDM project. And NAMA is, in this sense, relatively similar to the considerations that you have to do with CDM. It is about drawing the appropriate system boundaries and be sure you have leakage effects in the game. We have so far been mostly focusing on mitigation actions here, but I think it's important once again that we are aware that a part of the MRV of mitigation actions, we also have the challenge of national inventories that need to be MRV'd, and of course the support mechanisms. There is a need to monitor and verify the finance that is flowing, the capacity building that is done, and so on. That is important also, especially to feedback to donors what has happened and how has the money that has been spent been used. Now some recommendations if you do a new MRV design in the context of new mitigation instruments. First of all, we believe it's important to think about the purpose and usefulness of the MRV systems beyond the greenhouse gas emission reductions. Why is this important? Because climate change is an important driver, but to excite a donor and to excite the host government for the new system, it's very important to show what the side benefits of the program is beyond greenhouse gas emission reductions. So beyond measuring the greenhouse gas implications, I think it's increasingly important to measure other impacts. Has this activity generated jobs? Has it contributed to environmental performance? Has it led to poverty alleviation? So, broaden the scope. Second recommendation, do not reinvent the wheel. Build upon existing standards wherever possible. We have gone a long way in the past 12 years to come up with standards, and we'll be ashamed to throw them all away. And of course, now recommendation number 3, adapt this wheel wherever possible, wherever needed, without compromising environmental integrity. And finally, I would like to highlight why all these recipes and all these recommendations are, of course, challenging, especially in case of NAMAs. The first and most important point here to make is that if you talk about NAMAs, everybody has a different idea of what it actually is. You can see on this graph here that by December 2030, out of the NAMAs submitted, we had more or less equal distribution between policy NAMAs, program NAMAs, and project NAMAs. So these are all very different, as you will see in a second. This variety of NAMAs makes it very difficult to come up with a consistent, homogeneous MRV system. The policy NAMA and the program NAMA are very, very different to monitor and verify. And also, the UNFCCC has given very little guidance for MRV on NAMAs. Of course, this has been partly done on purpose. As many of you are aware, the monitoring and verification of NAMAs is one of the most difficult points in the UN negotiations. Many parties do not want that the international community is really drilling deep and looking carefully at what exactly is the outcome of a mitigation action. To give you an example on this is a very simple case that we have. Let's say we have a NAMA that is about replacing boilers in small and medium enterprises for thermal energy generations. You will see that this is relatively simple. You have to measure the type of fuel used, the fuel emission factor, efficiency of boilers, and so on. So that's not a big issue. If you do that, your NAMA focuses on actual implementation of this program. You will find yourself in a world that relies on the CDM. You will have to measure quantities, you have to measure efficiency, emission factors, and so on. We have default factored by the IPCC, and so on. However, if your NAMA is now more a policy NAMA and you want to measure the impact of a policy in this field, the situation changes completely, and you will have to choose much different, quite different MRV parameters. You will then talk about technological economic potential for the next saving in the next 10 years. You will have to estimate direct and indirect post-NAMA emission reductions, and so on. So as you can see, a direct implementation is very different from a policy intervention in terms of monitoring verification. And very obviously, these two options need very different requirements on all levels. With this, I would like to conclude for now. In the annex of this presentation, which I'm sure will be available for all of you, we have listed the different MRV standards that are existing right now and what sectors they cover. I would like to conclude with, once again, the recommendations. Don't reinvent the wheel. Use whatever is existing, but adapt it as needed without compromising environmental integrity of the MRV systems. With this, I would like to thanks for now.
Thank you, Renat, for a very comprehensive presentation. It's Miguel Rescalvo here with DMPGL Energy. And first of all, I would like to thank all the participants for being here today, and especially UNDP and the World Bank Institute for organizing this webinar. I hope that we can get over the small technical problems we had, but if there's any problem with the video or the sound, please feel free to give some feedback through the chat. I'm going to focus on how to do the MRV part in the Sustainable Development contribution from mitigation programs, including NAMAs. And I'm going to try to go through 4 different parts. First of it is why it's challenging to do MRV in mitigation programs beyond emission reductions, but also what's the value we can get from that exercises. I will then go through some of the existing experiences that some of them were already mentioned by Renat, and we'll conclude with what are the key factors we should have into account when we design a monitoring and reporting system for sustainable development benefits, but also in the verification or assessment part of those benefits. And finally, and briefly, given the time we have, I will propose a very simple but complete possible structure for the SD benefits part within a mitigation program. To start with, I think it's relevant to say when we are talking about mitigation programs, are those different exercises that are happening now around the world to mitigate climate change that are characterized from being very different to what we were using before. We are used to work under the CDM scheme with a very well-established set of standards and procedures and internationally accepted. That is changing, as all of us know, mainly and among other reasons because of the pace that international negotiations are happening. Those are changing to have a very diverse options and alternative of mitigation activities being taking place around the world at the country level, but not only at the country level, also at subnational level and region. And when we see all of those mitigation programs, including NAMAs that are happening out there, all of them has a common pattern is that sustainable development, SD, is very relevant as part of those programs. To the point that emission reductions are one more of the benefits of the proposed programs and often is not the main driver of the intervention. And when we put the emission reduction contribution as part of the development benefits, we enter into a space when that overlaps with the national priorities for sustainable development. Other relevant point to set up the stage for this conversation is how the CDM has approached SD. While sustainable development was a part of the requirements of CDM projects, it was done in a form that it didn't capture in the emission reductions that were validated or verified. It didn't capture the value of the sustainable development contribution. So while it was part of the game, it was not factored in the emission reduction value. Other fact is that the current programs and standards that try to address the MRV part of SD are really not being as successful as we all wish in linking investment and payment to the performance of when it of the program or the project when it comes to sustainable development. So if we take this as a number of points that in our experience we are seeing out there now, the next question is, what are the challenges around sustainable development MRV, and why is this difficult? I would say we need to start with the definition of SD and the fact that there is not a global agreement of what SD or sustainable development means. The second challenge is that at the country level, when we have a NAMA or a mitigation program with sustainable development contribution, it steps very quickly into the political space and an area of work that is considered a sovereign issue. Each country determines what are the priorities for the country and the policies that the country needs to implement to advance in these fronts, and also the performance indicators to monitor the implemented policies. And at the three levels where I think we all can agree we see SD happening: the economic, the social, and the protection to the environment. So these two challenges, the definition of SD and that we step in the terrain of the national policy landscape, already poses a challenge on how to design a proper MRV. If we go one step down to what's happening at the mitigation program or NAMA level. Well, already Renat mentioned a couple of these points. These mitigation programs are very diverse. We are going from, we see from a bundle of projects that are put together to be part of a program or a NAMA to NAMAs that try to change the policy landscape of a country, for example, in the energy or the transport sector. When it comes to the scope of these programs, we also face the challenge of being very different. Some of them attack one sector, but others cover a different sector. And also, as already mentioned, some of them has a national scope, but others go to the subnational level, cities, and for example, and others go to the regional level. So that makes all of this exercise difficult. Thirdly, when we see programs, we especially NAMAs that need to be nationally appropriated. But what we observe in the exercises being done nowadays is this lack of alignment between the SD goals and objectives of a specific program and the national sustainable development priorities. A second relevant point based on our experience is that we see NAMAs and programs claiming sustainable development benefits that are totally outside the scope of work and the level of authority of the NAMA management entity. And this is going to impact how MRV can be done, because the lower the authority of the entity and people implementing the program towards demonstrating the benefits that they are claiming, it's going to be more difficult for them to be able to implement an MRV system in that fact. The same token and related to this, some of these programs are claiming SD benefits, specifically indirect impacts, that are very, very far along the value chain, and for which it's not easy to demonstrate that anything is really happening, even when the spirit, when the program was designed, was positive. Well, this couple of slides has focused very much on why it is difficult. In summary, it's difficult because of the lack of clear definition, because when we have a nationally appropriate action, we need to think of the alignment with the national priorities in sustainable development. And is thirdly, it's difficult because NAMAs and programs need to claim sustainable development benefits that are under control, their control, if we want to put it like that. But fact is, many of those benefits are actually happening, but are not directly linked to the level of control of the entity managing the. So if we see those are the main challenges. So what are the benefits of doing MRV for sustainable development benefits when doing it for the emission reduction components, as Renat already said, is difficult enough? Well, I would like to mention two group of value creation actions here. One group is internal and the other is external value. Internal value will obviously be related to being able to internally having a system to demonstrate how well we are doing towards the objectives and the goals we claim ourselves that we were going to have in the social, environmental, and economic development in the jurisdiction where the program is implemented. But also it's going to help us to identify areas of opportunity on where we need to be better because we are not reaching those goals. Externally, it will be very beneficial to be able to demonstrate different parties a level of commitment and the actual results that we have achieved compared to the goals we established. It will, as we all can agree, crucial if there is any kind of pay-for-performance scheme that we want the program to be part of. And moreover, when we are talking about supported NAMAs or other programs where we are we're trying to get some external finance, is going to give donor institutions, multilateral banks, and the private sector the confidence to support those actions and to make sure that there is a plan for implementation and reporting on what has been done. So the exercise of including SD in the MRV part of programs and projects, it's not totally new, even when it's been increasing, I would say, in the last couple of years because of this fact that I described at the beginning, that programs and NAMAs are more than emission reductions projects. But already in the CDM, there were some efforts, especially in the last few years, to support project developers on how to address SD benefits with the CDM Sustainable Development Tool that I'm sure you all know. The gold standard has already been mentioned by Renat. It was one of the first efforts to really have a established and systematic approach to SD benefits within the projects. But there are some different approaches that I would like to introduce here and to open the discussions around that. We have a not so well known in the CDM community approach by Envision that is done by the Institute for Sustainable Infrastructure that proposes a rating system to quantify and rate the community, environmental, and economic benefits of all types of infrastructure projects. We also have the effort that CCAP started also a couple of years ago on providing guidance for selecting SD indicators. And more recent, we have the DNVGL, our own proposal to the market to have a global carbon development standard that has been published and is being piloted now. And let's not forget of the efforts of the globally networked carbon market task force led by the World Bank to establish a system to be able to compare carbon assets from different mitigation opportunities. within that task force, there has been an exercise done on developing a NAMA rating protocol that includes the development benefits module, meaning that it's rating the development benefits contribution of the NAMA. So we've gone through the challenges of doing MRV in NAMAs and programs. I have tried to explain what the value internally and externally for that, and what are the different standards and initiatives around that happening nowadays. And I'm sure I didn't mention all. I mean, Renat put some more in his slides, and I'm sure there are more out there. But I try to blend what we know in CDM, in gold standard, with new initiatives that are, migrating from what is the traditional evaluation methods to, for example, rating systems approach for that. If I can finalize with 3 slides on, okay, independently of the challenges and the value and who is doing that externally, what do we need to take into account if we want to do and to implement a SD component in our mitigation program? And what do we need to do to ensure that the monitoring and reporting is possible? So I could very simply refer to this well-known plan, do, act, check cycle. So we need to define a smart goals within our program for sustainable development. We need to establish SD performance indicators that are aligned with, if I may say, with something. We may need to align them with the national priorities, what will be very important if we are talking of a NAMA. And we can also align our indicators with, for example, the Millennium Development Goals. Once we have our goals and the way to monitor that, the next step is to define how we are going to do the MRV for those performance indicators. And fourth step, we need to act on the feedback that our MRV system is giving us on how we are doing, and very simply, being able to take actions if we are not accomplishing what we want. When it's important, when it comes to the assessment initiatives out there, I already mentioned, so I'm going to be quickly about this, that there's been an array of options there, going from the well-known yes-no output of the assessment and to a very different approach, at least for the CDM community, that is having a rating output for the sustainable development contribution of the initiatives. I think it's relevant to stop here one moment and say, well, the 2 possible approaches for developing standards and guidance on MRV sustainable development verification is either to set a very specific list of key indicators per type of program that we can find out there. But given the very diversity approach that I have described before, a more common approach we see is using this PDAC system that I described to set the expectations for those programs. Just to finalize, I want to do that, not go into details because we didn't have time, but very briefly suggesting a possible structure for the SD part of the mitigation action. So the structure of the development of the program needs to include these objectives and goals that I have already discussed, the identification of direct and indirect benefits. How do we plan to implement that? And also, who is responsible for what? What is the financial structure to make it happen? What are the indicators we're going to use? Very important, the participatory mechanisms for the different stakeholders in our program. Obviously, when we talk about SD, we need to factor in the non-negative impacts. These are really a yes-no criteria related to child labor, social labor law compliance, etc. For the MRV part, it will be very important that we address very similar components to what we address with emission reductions. The boundaries, the baseline, the estimation of benefits, and the methodologies used, and how we are going to do the MRV plan with qualitative and quantitative metrics. So that's all from my side. I will conclude that SD MRV is not an easy topic for what I described, but that there are some good initiatives out there, and I think it's very encouraging for the market to see that donors and multilateral institutions and the private sector is more and more interested to link payments and investments to other components in the benefits of the program beyond the emission reductions part. Thank you very much.
Presentation. And to start with the QA session, we have prepared 2 teaser questions. The first question is for Renat. Do you believe that the CDM standard is an appropriate foundation also for instruments like NAMAs? So most of the people think that moderately appropriate. It's still ongoing, yeah. More than 70%, almost 80%, that CDM is moderately appropriate. Could you please discuss this response briefly, Renat?
Thank you very much, Alexandra. Indeed, interesting question, and I'm quite amazed that moderately appropriate is the top runner here. In fact, this would also be my answer to this question, and I'm telling you why. The CDM has been very useful for certain types of mitigation action. I think the CDM has been absolutely useful for projects like biogas mitigation, landfills, but also for renewable energy, biomass, and so on, and many more types. However, we have all to admit that the CDM wasn't very useful for other types of technologies. And there I'd just like to mention 2 examples. Building, the whole building sector. The CDM has been very difficult for buildings simply because each and every building is different, and without citywide benchmarks and so on, you probably won't get much further. The second example is transport. CDM has been always very difficult for transport projects, also because of the decentralized nature of the mitigation action. So when I see this reply moderately appropriate, my conclusion is, let us base new tools, new MRV tools on the CDM where useful, but let's create new, more sector-wide standards in other sectors such as building and transport.
Okay, thank you very much, Renat. And the second question for Miguel is, will the introduction of sustainability parameters and the MRV ensure achievement of sustainability goals of NAMAs in a consistent manner? So the option is absolutely, in most cases, partly, or not at all. So the poll is still open for voting. So the majority thinks in most cases. Yeah, Miguel.
Yeah,
Almost
thank you very much.
in most cases.
Yeah, thank you very much, Alexandra. And well, I think the results are showing the middle ground with what the question was designed, right? And we have most of the votes in most cases. We also have some people saying not at all. I think this reflects the complexity of the sustainability concepts that I described at the beginning of my presentation, and the challenges on how to consistently design MRV options for those SD goals. But I'm very happy to say that in most cases, we agree that in most cases, we can actually make an effort and design a system that can actually monitor and contribute to the achievement of SD goals as part of the mitigation programs.
Okay, thank you very much, Miguel. We have now the forum open for your questions. The first question. One question from Oliver Kerr for Renat. When quantifying emission reductions from energy efficiency activities, is rebound taken into account as part of leakage? Renat, this is a question for you.
I would argue that this is exactly one of the items that's a classic case of leakage, of potential leakage, and this is why it is so important to exactly discuss this. This has already been the case with the CDM, and I'm very sure it is the case also for new schemes such as NAMAs. When introducing energy efficiency measures, a lot more than the simple emission reduction does happen. You have change in the operating procedures. You have potentially upstream and downstream changes. You have rebound effects. These are aspects that need to be considered. They need to at least be understood to what degree they're important. And probably one has to introduce certain thresholds. If such effects are above a certain percentage, they need to somehow be reflected in the DMRV design of the new scheme.
Okay, thank you, Renat. We have another question from Dr. Udin for Renat and Miguel. Do you think at any point of time all other standards will be superseded by ISOs?
You want to go, Miguel?
Yeah, I can answer that one. That's, I think, well, it is maybe a little bit of a personal opinion. In my opinion, that could and should have been the case many years ago, because at the end of the day, little bit of what we have tried to do in CDM and the different Kyoto Protocol mechanisms has been a little bit of reinventing the wheel, instead of relying on institutions like ISO that has been developing similar standards for many, many years. Said that, it also depends on what are the priorities from the ISO side, and I saw some of the ISO representatives being here as participants. So what I can say is that ISO is, for example, in the sustainability part, really making an effort to integrate the sustainability concept in their standards. So I think that the answer to your question is yes, that's possible, but also part of the answer is, in my opinion, lies very much on a political decision, not a technical decision, because from the technical point of view, that could have been the case years ago.
Okay, thank you very much, Miguel. Dear audience, we extend the webinar for 15 minutes because of the technical problems we had. So there's a question from Hannah to Renat. If a country undertakes more policy NAMAs as compared project NAMAs, does it mean it has less emission reductions?
No, I don't think so at all. A policy NAMA can have major transformational, can cause major transformational changes, while a project-based NAMAs could in fact be very small. It could also be the other way around, that the project NAMA, if you want to call it that way, is has a very, very broad scope, where a policy NAMA is very ineffective. I think there is no general rule to say the one is basically better in terms of delivering emission reductions than the other. But I think it's important to note that these two types of NAMAs are very different in how they work, and are, as I have tried to show in my presentation, they're very, very different from how a monitoring and verification scheme would have to be designed in order to properly address these two. another important element is that a policy NAMA tends to work indirectly. So it tends to be more difficult, more complicated to measure the direct consequences. And the second big difference is, we have talked about it, leakage and system boundaries. I think it's in general terms, we can say that policy NAMAs, in case of policy NAMAs, questions of leakage and system boundaries are even more important because they're very obviously occurring in most cases. So no judgment on which one is really better and delivering better results, but very clearly very different in terms of MRV.
Okay, excellent, Renat. And a question for Miguel from Maria. How can MRV stringency or quality of the system can actually inform the probability of achievement of SD goals?
Yeah, thank you, Alexandra, and thank you, Maria, for the questions. I see you're framing the question in the chat within the rating option for monitoring and SD benefits. And I think it relates to this cycle that I tried to explain. A robust MRV system will ensure that we keep our commitment to have clear goals, and that we have a system for implementation, and that we are going to periodically assess how well we have done against that and take action. And that is the way maybe humans being have of forcing themselves to really do something. Because it's not only that we need to establish goals and targets for our programs, is that we need to make sure that they are monitored, and if they are not going well, we take action. When you factor in the rating part, I think it's a fantastic method of motivating people and management entities to do more. Because instead of a pass, no pass approach, the output of that process is a number in a quality continuum. Let's say from 0 to 100. If your rating is at the 60 or 80% of that quality ladder, it really helps as a push to go upwards and to identify improvement areas for that system. So I think that we are seeing with the system I introduced from Envision or the one that the task force for network carbon markets is proposing is really a game changer in how the assessment of programs and projects has been done in the past, and we strongly believe it can create value. Thank you.
Okay, Miguel, and there's a related question from Lilian. Do you think that the gender perspective can be efficiently integrated in broader MRV standards for
good. It's a good question. I think Renat mentioned a very good case that is young, is not being out there so many years, but is progressing well. That is this women carbon standard, and is very much focused on how these projects in that case can benefit and factor in that gender case in the benefits of the program. So I very much suggest to read what is being doing and to be in contact with them. Maybe.
Okay, and another question from Miguel from Hamke. The ISO standards are developed and revised democratically and hope for wider stakeholder consultation of MRV. Is there any hope for wider stakeholder consultation of MRV rules?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think that relates to the other question we had before. Yeah. And I think that's the great value of the ISO standards. I focus more on the many years of expertise developing a standard by the ISO organization. Well, it is the hope that there is more stakeholder consultation on MRV rules. I would say the stakeholder consultation is there, but is taking at the individual approach. At least all the standards that DNV develops, they are subject to a stakeholder consultation in one way or another. But it's very much also true that it depends on who is the customer and who is the standard done for. So beyond that, and factoring that broader stakeholder consultation in the UNFCCC process, well, it is there. We may or may not agree on how it is done, but the consultation is there. But I would go back to my previous comment that, well, the ISO is an organization that has been doing there for dozens of years, and a little bit we are trying to reinvent the wheel in the carbon market. But that's what we have, and yes, I hope that there is some hopes that we can structure that process a little bit more.
Okay, thank you very much, Miguel. And there's a question from Sasha for Renat. You have focused on NAMAs. Do you think that existing comprehensive MRV guidance for CDM POAs, for example, gold standard, do not harm, and SDI assessment, World Bank's tool for assessment of co-benefits, UNFCCC framework, if this is sufficient for energy efficiency and renewable energy projects or programs, even if facilitated by NAMAs?
Thank you, Sasha, for the question. Just before I answer this one, I would like to just quickly add on what Miguel said to this issue, to the women carbon standard. I'm doing this just because it's a very interesting example on how the discussion goes when talking about MRV. So we were challenged with the question: how do you actually measure gender benefits? It's an epic discussion you can have around that. For the moment, after long discussions, we thought that as a proxy, as one of the compromises between a very complex system and on the one side and some reliable figures on the other side, we tend to use the time saved per annum as the proxy for this. So the gender benefit at the moment for this project is measured how many hours, for example, of collecting fuel wood do the women or the girls save in case of that project. So I'm just mentioning this because it's an example how from a very complex question you have to boil it down to a measurable, monitorable and verifiable parameter, even if of course this isn't by no means perfect at all. But now, Sasha, to your question, are the existing tools sufficient in case of renewables and energy efficiency? I think your question points at two angles. One is the greenhouse gas emission reduction question, and the second is the sustainable development co-benefits question. As for the first one, I would again say it depends, but for certain technologies, I'm actually very convinced that the CDM has provided a very, very comprehensive framework. For example, energy efficiency in a steel plant or in a cement plant, energy efficiency on industrial level is very well covered by CDM, and I think there's not much point to add much on that. We know the factors, we know how to draw system boundaries, so that's really quite good. Once again, energy efficiency in the building sector is a different topic. There, the existing tools are much less clear and they need much more tailoring to local circumstances. So, answer would be, it depends. Now, in terms of co-benefits, that's a question more for Miguel, but also from my side. I think, frankly speaking, we are much, much less developed on those issues than we are on the greenhouse gas emission reductions, simply because, to be very frank, sustainable development benefits hasn't been too much of an issue in the CDM time. The big focus was on greenhouse gas emission reductions. So I think that we will see more in this field coming up over the coming years, simply because that's absolutely needed if we want to get host country governments, donors, and so on excited about mitigation action. But Miguel, maybe you should add here.
No, I think I agree with you, and that is in line with what I presented, right? Is a complex issue, and CDM was tiptoeing on that, but not going deep, and we don't have the mechanisms yet to link finance and investments to the performance when it comes to to sustainable development benefits, while that has been pretty well developed for the GHG portion. I would add to that part of the emission reductions and the MRV. I think that following the CDM methodologies for MRV is totally possible and is maybe the best case when you want to have a very high level of accuracy, right? As Renat mentioned, there's a lot of experience, a lot of people has worked to develop these methodologies and approve them. What we need to think first, and we pointed that out in both presentations, is what do you want to achieve with your program? So you have an energy efficiency housing program, and your goal is not to have external finance supporting the program. Maybe for what is a domestic reporting, you can take other approaches that not the complicated, or not complicated, but comprehensive methodologies proposed in CDM for those specific cases that are going to lead, are very good because are going to lead to a 95% accuracy, but maybe for a domestic reporting consumption and not something that you want external support for, you actually don't need the 95% accuracy level, and you could learn and take lessons learned from other more simple systems that are simple, and not because they are clever than CDM, it's simply because you are going to have a lower level of accuracy in your reporting, but it's maybe enough for what you want to achieve.
Okay, thank you very much, Miguel. And now, as we are running short of time, unfortunately, we have to end the discussion at this webinar. I take one last question from Emmanuel Benjamin about MRV of agroforestry, which is still problematic. And do you think, maybe this is for Renat, what do you think one can do to improve on this, since we do not have to reinvent the wheel?
Yes, indeed. Agroforestry and the whole land use space was, in the past 12 years, really not much of a topic, and this was basically for two reasons. One was that the CDM hasn't really made it easy for project developers to engage in such projects. The CDM only provided so-called TCRs, temporary CRs. And no investor really wanted to have a temporary CRs. Everybody wanted to have a permanent CR. So it was really kind of a non-starter. And the second reason why it never took off really was that the European Emission Trading Scheme, the UETS, excluded forestry credits altogether due to various reasons. So also from that side, there was never real interest in developing forestry and land use based mitigation projects. So we are lagging behind there. However, it is important to note that we have covered some ground in the past few years. Once again, I'd like to mention the voluntary carbon standard and now recently also the gold standard. These are voluntary standards, but nonetheless, the quality of their work is good, is high, and we have now covered some ground in these fields as well. We have also, and I would like to add this maybe as the last point, in the past years, due to the technological revolution, it has now, year by year, we get better satellite data, we get faster computers to actually calculate baselines and project emissions. Even Google has entered this space. So it is now also the data quality is much better, which in case there is an interest from donors, from investors, to do such projects, we are now much fitter to actually go down that road, but we're still lagging a bit behind. And in case this is the last time I have the words, I would also like to mention once again that this is actually still the main problem. We need to understand where will the money come from and where will the demand come from for such schemes and to co-finance such schemes. Is it local money? Is it international money? Is it money from carbon markets? Depending on that, we will also be quicker or less quick in advancing with methodologies, for example, in the space of agriculture and agroforestry.
Okay, thank you very much, Renat. So before I close, I want to give Renat and Miguel a brief opportunity to say goodbye. Maybe 1 minute each.
Miguel?
Miguel?
Yeah. Miguel?
I go first? Okay, good. Thank you very much. I think it's very interesting to see that we are all together in this community trying to find and working a new way of mitigation instruments and actions. And I also want to thank the UNDP and the World Bank Institute for organizing this and be able to share our thoughts in those new instruments and challenges that this climate community has ahead of us. So thank you very much, and thank you very much to the participants.
Also from my side, I'm very excited that we had such a big audience in this virtual room here, and it gives me confidence that this topic, measurement, reporting, verification, is important, and we have a lot of supporters who are pushing this ahead wherever on the world you are. I can only wish you the best of luck in all your efforts. And let's all keep in mind, only if it's measured, it has a value in terms if you want to attract finance and investment. And this we should always keep in mind. In case we want to unlock climate finance of what sort ever, be it green bonds, be it direct investments, be it local money, only if the results are measured will you attract these investors in the long term. So the work of all of you is very important. The work of the World Bank, of the UNDP, and of course of DNV with Miguel is extremely important to advance this. I wish you all the best of luck.
So thank you very much, Renate and Miguel, for your excellent presentation, insights on MRV standards and sustainability indicators. And also thank you, Peter and your team, for the good collaboration, the World Bank Institute and the technical team for making this webinar possible. And of course, especially you, our audience, for joining in and making the session interactive. The presentations will be available on the website within 24 hours. And we would also very much appreciate your feedback on this session. Please take a minute after the session to provide your feedback. But before we close, I would also like to announce our upcoming 4th webinar, which will be held on Wednesday, the 26th of March, when we will talk about NAMAs and hope to meet you all again. So until next time, thank you very much and wish you a very good day.